Does reading literature alone make one truly educated, or is this a foolish fallacy in the 21st century? So for the motion, right, we have Team Shakespeare, which comprises of John Pinto, Lynn, and Nadia. And Team Steve Jobs comprises of Jason, Tanusha, and Emil. So, before further ado, I would like to invite the debaters one after the other. But if I could ask the debaters, before you do your presentation, just take a minute and tell us something about yourself, so we get to know you a little bit better. So the first speaker will be from Team Shakespeare, John Pinto.
Hello. Sorry, John, you can stay where you are. It's fine.
Stay where I am?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Pass the mic.
Feels a lot safer. Right, so thanks a lot for the opportunity. My name is John. So I'm a counseling psychologist by profession, and before I became a psychologist, I was catching mosquitoes actually. So I was actually doing research on malaria. Yeah, don't ask why. Right. So as the first speaker, I'm going to do a few things. First, I'm going to try and define the topic. So the topic for today is, does reading literature alone make one truly educated? Or is this a foolish fallacy in the 21st century? After defining the topic, I'm going to introduce the speakers after me. I'm going to roughly give a breakdown of what they'll be speaking about. So, can't really breathe. Right. I'm going to start by the definitions. Now, our definition of literature is as a body of written works, and this definition is traditionally applied to works of aesthetic excellence, or excellence of form or expression, and expressing ideas of permanent or universal interest. So this is a definition that is a little bit narrow, and we actually deliberately choose to narrow the definition of literature, because otherwise we'll be talking about any form of written work. Right? And we don't want to talk about any form of written work because we are actually aiming to get at the heart of the debate, which is, does literature itself, as we understand it, does it actually aid in making a person truly educated? Or is that a foolish fallacy? Before that, we also defined reading to include any form or means of obtaining and assimilating knowledge into the mind. So we're not talking about reading as reading per se, but we also include things like audiobooks, like visuals, that would deliver the concepts of literature, so to speak. We take the phrase truly educated to mean having received not just a barely functional set of know-hows, but as the word educate suggests in the Oxford Dictionary, being given intellectual, moral, and social instructions. And to be more precise, these are instructions on how to live one's life in a way that provides a deep sense of meaning, achievement, and pride in the eyes of oneself and those around him. We also posit that the phrase fallacy of the 21st century implies that the very notion of the importance of literature in relation to true education is nothing more than an invention of the present age. And this is an idea that we as a team very strongly detest, because we don't believe that it is a fallacy that reading literature is directly related to making somebody truly educated. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try and lay out the arguments, and then my second speaker, Lynn, will rebut the objections laid out by the first speaker of the opposition. And she will also talk about how literature enriches a person by making knowledge across time and space accessible to them. The third speaker, Nadia, will eventually rebut all the points laid out by the opposition and summarize our position as solid and unshakable. I hope. Now, I want to start with a little quote here. This is by C.S. Lewis. It says, "Literature adds to reality it does not simply describe it. It enriches the necessary competencies that daily life requires and provides. And in this respect, it irrigates the deserts that our lives have become. Right? And this is quite profound. And I must also remind us here today that we are currently at a book launch organized by a book club. And it's quite interesting how we are debating whether or not literature is contributing to one being truly educated. I'm going to start by saying yes, it does contribute, and it alone contributes to one being truly educated. And by saying this, I'm not trying to dispute the fact that there are other ways that would make someone somewhat educated. But being somewhat educated is opposed to being truly educated in a holistic sense. And this is basically at the heart of our argument. We as a team truly believe that in order to be truly educated, one has to indulge or explore literature as art, and literature as excellence, and literature as the ideas that are being portrayed by the best minds in the world. Now I want to start off with a little bit on the psychological perspective to begin with. Now literature as it is essentially a distillation of the ideas of the human mind. So if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, people acted before they could actually talk, right? And because they acted before they could actually talk, they eventually found ways in which they could express what they were acting about, to express what's important in life. And these expressions first found their ways to, let's say, a public audience of cavemen through the pictures that one would find on the walls of caves. And eventually, this is like probably proto-literature. This is like the earliest form of literature ever available to the humankind. And this eventually developed into written works. And it is these written works that provide us with a form of guidance, I would say, that enables one to expand his knowledge beyond simply what one would know on a regular basis. In other words, it does bring one to expand his mind to go beyond what he already knows. And I'd like to, before I pass it on to the next speaker, I'd like to end by saying that at the end of the day, if you look at it, true education has to encompass the element of reading literature. Because when one reads literature, he's not only reading a bunch of words. What he's actually doing is he's reading the actions, he's reading the way of life, he's reading the experiences that is made available to him through the words that are in the literature or the piece that he's actually reading. And therefore, I think that it is indispensable for one to be able to read literature. It's indispensable for one to be truly educated without reading literature. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John. Before I invite Jason Ho from Team Steve Jobs, I have a request, Dr. Sophia and Tun. If you all could do us the honor of being judges and ask both sides represented to give us your views and perhaps suggestions by the one. Okay, I now invite Jason to present from Team Steve Jobs.
Hello, thank you very much. Alright, so hi everyone. Those who don't know me, I'm Jason. I'm a tutor at Monash University in Malaysia. I actually talk about media studies, talk about how you could study the idea of film and television as being presented as mediums on screen. But I also have a degree in communications and writing, so I was actually at an alma mater, I was a student at my alma mater at Monash University. Alright, so in regards to today's topic, we are arguing that while reading literature alone makes one educated, this is still a fallacy for the 21st century. And while John has agreed that it is easier to narrow the definition of literature itself, this is where we will have to expand on it. And basically, the fallacy of this very debate lies in the very definition of what literature is itself. So yes, we can agree that literature as defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is as such. It is writings in prose or verse. It is the body of written works produced in a particular language or age. Literature is even considered as printed matter for that matter. When we think about literature, we think of studying texts that are held to some extent at high esteem. literature, the term itself, elevated with a capital L. So you think of texts such as Jane Austen, Homer, William Shakespeare for that matter. You know, these are the texts that we think of as studied in universities, in colleges, in institutions. Or texts that have been addressed and studied by scholars and historians themselves. These texts, we consider them to be literature because they speak of major themes, of what it is to be a member of a growing and changing society. They comment on the cultures in which they are conceived and are still relevant to the present day. But what about other texts? Why don't we consider other texts to be literature, or rather, what it is about the texts themselves that we say, no, it's not really meant to be literature? Does that really make us different in terms of not being educated? For instance, look at the rise of comic books or graphic novels today as being more noticeable, and even being studied at higher institutions, and being noticed by a much wider audience themselves. Once upon a time, you might think of comic books as being seen as nothing more than serialized narratives, as drawings, as cartoons, targeted towards juveniles, as more of, you could say, kid stuff, as it were. But today you have artists like Alan Moore, who wrote Watchmen, V for Vendetta. You have Art Spiegelman, who, his graphic novel series, Mouse, delves into the history of his father, who was a survivor at Auschwitz during the Nazi invasions. And of course, if I mention graphic novels, you can't have an example without Neil Gaiman, who basically wrote the Sandman series, which today, you know, it's become this series of comic books, this graphic novels that almost every intellectual, any reader would basically be aware of who these artists are. So these are artists who have somehow elevated comic books, graphic novels, made them more accessible for a mature adult audience. And to give another example, think about Persepolis, a graphic novel, also an autobiography written by Iranian-born French author Marjan Satrapi, who talks about her experiences growing up in Iran, talking about the conflicts she faces growing up in a society controlled by the Taliban. But this novel has also been studied in classrooms, in American institutions. In fact, it has been labeled, it has been featured in the American Library Association as one of the 10 most challenging books in 2014. So really, graphic novels, while they might not be considered as literature, but the images don't dilute the value of these books. A graphic novel can contain the same lasting value as you would see in great works of literature. I would also like to point out, there's another example of us members of the classic challengers, because while we have, yes, discussed works that would be considered as literature itself, but we've also discussed books that might not necessarily be thought of as in today's, or rather maybe in 10, 20 years, you know, perhaps they will be literature, but not in the extent of right now. In December 2018, we've actually discussed The $1 Billion Will, written by Bradley Hope and Tom Wright. We've discussed The History of God by Karen Armstrong, which is a history of looking at the three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We've discussed The Power of Now, which is technically considered to be a self-help book. And we've also discussed books by Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So really, literature is one of those terms that you might think of as being defined by perhaps members of a higher society, something that you would say, you know, is more esteemed, elevated, that perhaps we do not always define for ourselves. And of course, to give more examples, why are some aspects of mythology only considered as literature? You think of, for instance, Homer, who wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad, two epics which today most scholars and historians will tell you that is literature. You have the Saga of Beowulf, you have Thomas Malory's The Morte d'Arthur, The Death of King Arthur, all of which are considered by many to be works of literature. But what about other mythologies? Why not Norse myths, which are considered to be the second most studied myths after Greeks? Why do we not think of the prose Edda, the poetic Edda, the Norse gods as being literature itself? What about Indian myths and legends? What about the what about the Mahabharata or the Ramayana? Why do we not think of them as literature itself? So, to conclude, I would like to say that ultimately, in terms of what is being defined as literature, think of the people who really define it, or rather think of us ourselves. Does what we define as literature really resonate with others? If we don't read what is considered to be the literature with a capital L, does that make us any similar or different from other readers? Right, so that's it for today. Thank you.
I was kind of asking if I could sit and speak. Yeah, so thank you for coming. Just a brief explanation of myself. I am a lawyer by trade, and today I am the second speaker of Team Shakespeare. Now, to address the points made by the first speaker, thank you, Jason, for elaborating on the various different examples of what is literature. We believe that there's no actual difference or argument here between our two positions. We accept that that is all literature. We don't see that there's an argument there. So it's not entirely clear to me or to my team where the direction of that argument was taken. In that sense, we will now move on to my first point. I would like to make three quick points. Firstly, based on the elaboration given by Jason earlier, the works of literature educate us by expanding our conceptualization of the world around us, and most importantly, the world that came before us. Works of literature span back hundreds and hundreds of years, long before we were born, and will continue to do so long into the future. The books we write today, the books that were written yesterday, will live on longer than we will, especially if they're famous books. Reading the literature made 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, gives us an understanding of the world as it was then, and perhaps also an understanding of the world as it is now. We are the products of those who came before us. Today we are here for the book launch of the Classics Challenges. A number of articles in this book, including mine, were written during the peak MCO lockdown period. If you've gone through the book, you'll see that some of the other authors have written during this very intense time as well. This book can act as a capsule, a time capsule, for those in the future. Even now, reading back what we've written a year ago is already so profoundly different. I found that I had written about the introduction of QR codes, something that, my Siddhartha now I take for granted every single day. We all scanned it before coming in, I hope. Alright, okay. Let's consider other works of literature, like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, or Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Both are depictions of a dystopian future. And we can draw parallels between that dystopian future and us now. So in that sense, literature helps us to understand our world now and how to prevent negative things and bad things from happening. In that sense, it elevates us to become truly educated in the most holistic sense of that word. That brings me to my second point, which is, even taken at its absolute highest, reading literature, and only through reading literature, will one be able to become truly educated in that sense. You can learn through... Trade has been around for thousands and thousands of years, long before formal education was around. People have been apprentices for years and years before. An apprenticeship is something where you watch someone and you learn by watching them do it. That is one form of education. But we would argue that to become truly educated, to become truly knowledgeable about the world around you, you need literature. And it's only through reading literature that you can elevate yourself or be elevated to the next step. And this is true, and will also lead me to my third point, which is regarding the point of this argument being a fallacy of the 21st century. For 1,000 years now, education has been used as, literacy and education has been used as a tool of oppression. The most educated would be the leaders of society. The most educated would be the religious society, the religious leaders of the world. In that sense, literature and reading has always been seen as something that elevates someone to another level of knowledge about the world around you. So much so that they can lead a country, that they can lead the people. Kings, queens of the past were expected to be knowledgeable, to speak 7 languages, things like that, especially in Western society. So much so that they brought that with them when they came to Southeast Asia. But that's a debate for another day. In that sense, the notion of education, of literature being something that alone can transcend you from being knowledgeable on something or one point to becoming truly educated about the world around you has been around for way longer than I have been around, way longer than any of us have been around, way longer than the 21st century and the 21st century alone. I think that I will conclude there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. And now rebutting from, we have the second speaker, Anusha. Over to you.
Hi, okay, good afternoon. My name is Anusha. I'm a writer. I write primarily in Malaysia. Some of my books are being translated. Right, before I start with my points, I'd like to rebut Shakespeare's points. First, okay, yes, Shakespeare, literature, yes, we all read literature because it gives us a notion of what happened in the past, the historical perspective of what happened those years that we would not know. Yes, books are literature. The most educated being kings, queens, they do read, but they do also read scholarly articles. In university, they have this term called literature review, which are also forms of literature. What about articles, journals? They are also literature. So why only books classics are being called literature? So that's my point. So let me go into my first point. Does reading alone make us truly educated? No. When we are in university, we learn the theory to When in university, we learn the theoretical perspective of everything. Like for me, I was in mass comm. I learned mass comm, so I learned all the theory stuff. But yes, we do learn about how to think creatively, how to write, how to do this, how to do that. But it's not enough. It's not enough to make us truly educated. We have to actually practice what we actually learn to actually know whether what we learn, the theory stuff, is actually working for us. How many of you actually read a book and then went out there and tried whatever the book told you and it failed? It's basically part of trial and error that we have to actually practice. So here comes my point. Street smart versus book smart. Right? Even Steve Jobs himself, he was a college dropout. He believed that universities actually killed creativity, and he did not finish his studies. He dropped out after the first semester, and but he did not actually leave university altogether. He stayed there and he only studied what he loved. Example, he did study literature, and he found actually Shakespeare, King Lear's story to be very fascinating. He did learn calligraphy. People were saying, why calligraphy of all things? But you know what? When Macintosh was first designed, we had very beautiful typography because of Steve Jobs' knowledge in typography and calligraphy. We had a lot of very beautiful typography, and those who actually ridiculed him started to thank him for that. So I end my point by saying, reading literature alone does not make one truly educated. Hands down, this is a foolish fantasy of 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And now, Nadia, over to you.
Hi everyone, if you don't mind, I'm just going to move over here. Okay. Thank you for you all for being here. My name is Nadia. I'm a policy maker by day and an aficionado in sports by night. I think it's been quite a while since I've been in a room with so many people, so thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate that you're all here. Now, the debate is simple, right? The debate
By day and an aficionado in sports by
by night. By night? Can you all hear me? If you can't, then maybe I can speak. Oh. It's okay. Hello? Hello? Right. So back to it then. This motion was simple, right? In the 21st century, what makes a person truly educated? What are the requisite kinds of information this person truly needs to make decisions, to be informed, and to influence individuals for the better good? Or the not so better good, doesn't really matter. Now, on Team William Shakespeare, I'm going to start off my debate by saying that Steve Jobs had a couple books that he drew from as he was progressing through Microsoft. One of them, Moby Dick, the other, George Orwell. Animal Farm, right? So Animal Farm. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it shows the relevance of literature. Maybe not literally, but in terms of influence and importance. There were three things that were debated in today's debate. The first being the sources of literature, and we want to talk about the definition. Comic books, graphic novels, the lot. The second was the relevance of it in the 21st century. And here we're going to argue, on site William Shakespeare, that it is equally as relevant, if not more so. And the third being practical experience. So this is the argument on book smart versus street smart, right? And why literature still has a place in that debate, and is still very important to do so. Now first, the sources of literature. I think when John came up here, he told you that any work that was considered a form of excellence, widely reviewed, widely sourced, and widely related to are forms of literature. Now this includes maybe graphic novels as well. It includes comics. In fact, drawings that were drawn on Sanskrit a long, long time ago are still considered works of literature. It's still relevant. Right? We don't believe in squirreling the motion, because the heart of the motion is what does truly educated mean? And truly educated means being able to make informed decisions, having knowledge and not information. And that's why we still need to read, arguably enough. When you read a WebMD novel, especially in the heart of the pandemic, when you read that novel, that article, you still look for the sources, because that assures you that literature has been done, research has been made, and credible sources have been cited to ensure the validity of that information. And that's why it's still relevant in the 21st century. We'll move on to the second point, the relevance of literacy in the 21st century. The relevance of literature in the 21st century will tell you it's equally as important. The classic challenges use books as a coping mechanism, the collective experience of individuals to pass by the time and the trauma of this pandemic. And here we want to emphasize one thing, that your experience, your practical experience is important, but the collective experience of others that are captured within books, within validated journals, within articles, are equally as important and equally as a stepping stone for us to move forward in the future. The third thing that was brought up was, book smart versus street smart. And that's a very fair argument to make, right? You're only equally as good as how much you practice your work. And here I want to sort of bring your reference. I want you guys to imagine your doctors. I want you guys to imagine your lawyers, right? When you go into a clinic, you see somebody practicing, but you only trust the very best that have read through the work, that have read through the articles, that have read through the scholarly debates that have happened. And that's why literature is so important, right? Because it's easy to read, it's not easy to understand, and fully spend time to go through the work. And that's why we still need literature. I think the key takeaway of this debate is simple. You can have information, but you will not have knowledge. And knowledge comes through putting in the work, it comes through reading, and it comes through internalizing the facts that have been there for many, many years. Facts that have been validated, facts that have been debated on and are still true. And I think before I leave you, there are a couple things that we want from Team Steve Jobs to come up here and tell us for them to win the debate. The first is, what does a world without literature look like? And what would truly educated mean in that world? The second thing they come up here, they need to prove to you, is that in the absence of literature, what kind of thing do we refer to make sure that sound debates are still had and validated? That's all from me. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm late. I came when the debate started, so I missed everything about the challenges, but congratulations, I think that's done everything. Okay, before I start my points, please let me reiterate the topic for today so that everything's clear. So the question is, reading literature alone makes one educated, but is this a fallacy for the 21st century? Now in my presentation I'm going to say that it's a fallacy not only for the 21st century, but for the century that came before, and for the centuries that come afterwards. And I will do this by rebutting my opponent's points, reiterating some of the points made by my colleagues, as well as making some of my own. So let me start with my opponent's points, okay? So the first speaker mentioned that literature alone makes someone somewhat educated, meaning to say that you do not need literature alone to become wholly educated. You do not need literature alone to become wholly educated, but you need it nevertheless in order to move forward. But the point I would like to make is that, of course, literature makes one educated, but reading alone does not. So that brings me to my point, right? Which is that although literature helps in making one educated, and it does, I admit that, I think my colleagues here are ready to admit that as well, but reading alone is insufficient to enjoy the fruits of literature. Literature has many, is written, sure, that's how it's recorded, but it's enjoyed in many ways. It's experienced, it's lived, it's applied. So, I mean, back in the day when unlettered people may have made the majority of mankind, especially in this area of the world, how they still did enjoy literature, but they didn't read. How? So back in Malaysia, for instance, we had penglipu lara going around kampongs making their giving talks about Ramayana and Wayang Kulit, exactly. Thank you, sir. And so the people got to enjoy the fruits of literature, but did they read? No, they didn't. And so reading alone, I think, is insufficient, and my opponents did not address that point. So this brings me to my second point, which is that if reading alone makes someone somewhat educated, then are they saying that the unlettered cannot be educated? Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a bit arrogant to say that unlettered people cannot be educated, I think. I mean, of course, here we enjoy the fruits of modern state, and we can read, and I enjoy reading, don't get me wrong. But I mean, to go around to maybe parts of the world that do not have the benefits of education, of reading, and to say that, hey, you're not as educated as me, I think is a bit arrogant on the face of it. So, for instance, I would say that, in fact, in reality, the most educated person in the world, morally speaking, to me, of course, as a Muslim, is the Prophet. It's well known that he was unlettered. It's a well-known fact. Okay, this brings me to my third point. One cannot have a holistic education by relying on reading literature alone. There are other valid forms of knowledge. There's martial knowledge, there's moral knowledge, there's physical knowledge, and none of these require reading, ladies and gentlemen. So I just think, okay, just before I end it, please allow me to reiterate the points of my colleagues, which were, I think, unfairly criticized by the opponents here, which is that the first point being, literature as a fallacy is true. Those in power do define what literature is. That's just the fact of the matter. And so I think to disregard this argument is a bit unfair on the face of it, to my friend Jason there. Okay, number two would be that you need street smart and book smart. Okay, sure, book smart is one aspect of it, and I have just argued that you can get some book smart without reading through other forms of experiencing literature. Yes. Okay. Sorry, let me repeat that last point, which is that you need, the second speaker said that you need both. Sorry about that, doesn't like me, I think. It's on the other side. You need street smart and book smart to become truly educated. And so reading alone, ladies and gentlemen, is simply not enough. You have to apply knowledge, you have to experience it, you have to live it. I mean, of course I love reading, don't get me wrong, but what would literature be without plays? What would literature be without poems? What would literature be okay, I understand. It's defined in that way and it's recorded as such. Plays, for instance, the Shakespeare. My opponents are on the team Shakespeare, right? And the man wrote plays. However, plays are watched. And you can become educated by watching and understanding and experiencing literature on stage, right? You don't have to read. So reading alone, I think, that point in particular is something that I have a problem with. So please, let me end this argument by quoting someone I'm sure they like, Thucydides, who wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, which is one of the hallmarks of Western literature, which is that the society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting by fools. So, personally, I don't want my fighting done by fools, nor my thinking done by cowards, and reading alone is simply not enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anil. Before I invite the judges to give their comments and their verdict, maybe perhaps I could ask one or two of our guests if they would like to say something. I suppose we could ask Caroline. She's from France and she's going back home in a fortnight or so. Oh, she's already gone. Oh, I thought it was on a fortnight's time, not so soon. How about Saleh? Are you still around?
Here.
Ah, Saleh, if you'd like to say something? Yeah. For a minute or two. Saleh is from Afghanistan and he has been here for the last 2-3 years. Yeah.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Saleh, I'm from Afghanistan. I think it's more than 14 years I'm writing, artistic writing. When I was in my country, I give information and support my community, especially the victim people, because in Afghanistan, many years the people is under the war. So we support oppressed people with activity. So 8 years I work with BBC here, and I wrote drama, radio, and also some TV program, and something published in a magazine and newspaper, and give motivation and new information about education, about peace, about democracy, and about women's rights. And so I have a good memory, because when I see the impact of our activity with writing, so I was very happy, but still I can't forget that. When I came to Malaysia, I start again. So I run a theater, this theater of the operas. I'm a writer, and I write according the real condition of refugee community in Malaysia. And so we have a very good connection like today, with art, with writing. So happy to see you all, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saleh. Would anyone else like to say something? Karthik. Karthik is from India.
Hi, good evening everyone.
I'm not a very professional writer. I write occasionally when I meditate a poem, then then I feel writing, then the words will flow. That's how I feel. I start writing. Mostly I write on about my favorite quotes. That's how the writing has been come. The words will be flowing through my meditation that has been taught by my Swami Guru. He's a Malaysian as well. So I'm here in Malaysia for the past 12 years, about 10 to 12 years, since 2012. So I know him since then. So I was amazed actually when I finished writing this one, and Ms. Nas told that she wants to publish this. I was like, wow. because I'm not a professional writer, and I thought definitely this one needs to go through some sort of verifications, and I believe there will be a lot of corrections as well because of my I'm also not very good at grammars and everything. So then she told there's no corrections. I was like, yeah, wow, it's amazing. So everybody can write actually, and as our sorry, very hard for me to pronounce that is. So our chief guest has told everybody can write, and we must practice writing. And it's how do I practice writing is whatever the thoughts that flow, I don't format it first. I just put it in all the words that comes in, then I'll try to form a sentence, then only I will make it like a clean, whatever it is, whether it is a letter or it is my office document or whatever, but whatever that flows through, like words, just take the key points and then I write it. I try to write with my own hands, that is better, instead of typing or either in phone, or the flow will be much more better, because when we start using the technology, as our chief guest said, there will be a lot of interruptions like auto-correction, all those things that comes and interrupt our the thoughts will be disrupted. So I'm very glad that Ms. Nas chose my article to publish, and I feel this is also a work of divine to show that even anyone can write if their mind is clear, and it can be even published too. And somehow I'm not a very professional reader also. I mean, like, I don't read too much, but I keep the habit of reading once in a while. So just to keep the habit that I don't forget reading. And also, I have no connections with any of the book club except attending Swami Guru's event few times with the book club, right? So anything can be possible, and anyone can be a good writer if we practice it. So I think I also like to encourage everyone must read and keep the habit of writing as well. So that will help to make our thought process better. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. And without further ado, if I could invite the Dato Sofiran to provide the judge's verdict.
Amat saya hormati Tun Arsyad dan semua yang ada di sini. I'll mix English and Malay because I can't forget Malay. I cannot forget Malay. So when I speak English, I'll mix it up. I hope you don't mind. Number one, this is speaking not as an expert, as a layman. I'm a kampung man. Today is given this heavy task. I thought Tun would be rescuing me, but it is very unreasonable of me to expect him at this age to rescue me after he has rescued hundreds and thousands of people in Malaysia through his work. Yeah. we don't have to go through what he has said to us. I think what is most important in the title, the key words. Number one, you mentioned literature. What is it all about? Some of the speakers has gone through. What is your name again? Jason. Jason has touched a little bit about it. And also, I think Adim told me, I know your grandpa. I don't know you. I don't recognize you, but I know your grandpa. Yeah. And you have also touched on some of the point that is important. And so I got two from Shakespeare side, right? Now, literature is one side. Then you're talking about reading. Reading is something very strange to us Malay Muslim people. You know, very strange, because we got a direct order. Direct order. If you are in the military, a direct order, you defy, you are shot dead. But none has been shot dead because of not reading. And this is very peculiar. Balik rumah fikir-fikirlah apa maksud yang saya nak sebut di sini. So reading. Now, whether you are educated or not, the education is completely a different thing again. To me, it depends whether it creates character. I think some of you have touched on this, okay, especially the last speaker tu. Kalau kita membaca kemudian tak jadi apa pun kita ni, macam saya ni boleh gebang, sembang, kedai kopi, dia tak ada apa-apa. You know? So character building is what is mainly missing among readers in Malaysia. As I said, I am orang kampung. I think most of the people in kampung today, yeah, kita ni dah boleh membaca. Dan keluar darjah 6 pun boleh membaca A, B, C dan alif bata. You know? The worst kind is the one that can write, that can read, tapi tak faham. Maksudnya kita baca Quran, orang Melayu, orang Islam, ataupun bukan Melayu, Islam, dia pandai baca, dia literate, dia boleh tulis pun alif bata semua, tapi dia tak tahu maknanya. This is very strange, right? Very, very peculiar, special only to our people in Malaya or Malaysia. I'm not sure Sabah and Sarawak. You know? Let us think about that. So back to our debate. Both sides have given very good point. So if we truly want to know who wins, I would ask, what is the majority here? But me as a humble person, orang kampung, I would give you 50 and 50 with some extra point from Shakespeare side. There is one main point I think that was missed, though a shadow of it was mentioned here and there. What I see as missing is when you say 21st century, it means all this apa orang kata digitalization. Saya orang kampung tak berapa pandai benda-benda macam ini. It so happened that a few days ago, my good friend Zaini and myself was with Dato' Husamudi, the CEO of Karang Craft. He was lamenting that in the 70s and 80s, satu-satu buku ya, novel tu dia boleh print 300,000 copies boleh jual. Sekarang ni nak jual 100,000 kopi pun tak jalan, dia kata. Orang tidak membaca. So to me, it is not about as much writing, but it's about reading. As I mentioned earlier on, to us is a direct order. You defy, you ought to be shot dead. Because a direct order by Allah, and said, read, Ya Muhammad, and read, and 3 times. It was not an order to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but an order to the whole human being. And almost all in the kampung-kampung yang belajar sampai darjah 6 boleh membaca, tidak membaca. This is the mental block that we face today. Back into the 21st century, satu bala yang sedang berlaku sekarang ini, digitization. Kita tak ada platform, kita tak ada YouTube, kita tak ada Instagram, kita tak ada apa? Twitter. Semua benda-benda itu kalau kita buat, ni macam kita buat hari ni, kita masukkan YouTube lah ya. YouTube, kadang kita win. Nak pandai-pandai nak buat sendiri, that apa? Orang panggil apa? Platform. Kita tak ada. That is how much we are going to miss into the 21st century. Dan sekarang ni, yang saya kata bala ni ialah orang-orang kita pakai WhatsApp, orang-orang kita pakai Twitter. Dulu-dulu, tambah-tambah masa saya pun masuk universiti kena baca 3 buku sampai 5 buku untuk satu isu. Dalam sosiologi ke, antropologi ke, history ke, management ke, sebelum kita buat sesuatu conclusion. Ingat bila kita buat thesis apa semua kan, begitu prosesnya. That was the way we were brought up. Now especially young people are making conclusion, are making decision based on Twitter, based on WhatsApp. You imagine how matang, how mature, how relevant can they be? Is there any wonder now why our country, our nation, our people are in this shape today? I want to rest there because I want to let it sink into our head there. Tadi ada orang kita, I think Tun mentioned in his speech, the idea of Malaysia. Do we all know that we have failed up to this second to build Malaysia? The idea of Malaysia, orang Melayu nak macam ni, orang Cina macam tu, orang India macam ni, yang duduk Sarawak Melayu. We are now at a juncture which is very, very important for us to rethink, to rebuild. I'm sorry because we have an international audience, but I'm speaking about our nation. Nation building has failed in Malaysia. To the young or younger generation, I would like to appeal to really be conscious of this every day of your life. Reassess, relook. Apa benda ke Malaysia ini? Apa benda? Because we sit together, we are not meeting each other. And kata Malaysia, kemudian saya ingatkan peradaban Melayu, sejarah Melayu, Sriwijaya, segala benda ni. Ya? No. Kita punya yang berasal dari India misalnya, keturunan kita teringatkan kepada sejarah, kepada background, kepada apa sebut benda-benda. Begitu juga orang yang keturunan Cina. Bila masanya kita nak jadi orang Malaysia ni? What does it take to be a Malaysian? Sitting together at peace in our mind. Ketenteraman dalam hati kita. Rasa selesa. That is missing. So if reading literature can build the character, which means you have to be selective, because all kind of literatures can bring us to anywhere. And no, this is beyond being a judge. I have already made a decision to the judge. And the danger is you give me the microphone. So, before you got agitated. Yeah? Not normally I was more handsome than this. But because of the mask, my misa and my mustache berselera kan, nampak very ugly today. So I want to stop with that note. As a kampung ugly man speaking in this audience, and I will take all this back to my kampung. I have a mission. I have a place. I will transfer all the knowledge that I collect here back to the children in my kampung, with a prayer that one day we will have Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sofian. In fact, you have been very wise, like Solomon. And more than that, I think you have preached or broached a very important topic for all of us here in Malaysia, and that is to really fundamentally think and reassess of what it is to be a Malaysian and what it is that we need to do going forward. So with that, I think the formal proceedings of this afternoon is over. There are refreshments, there are drinks. Please mingle and help yourself to these refreshments. If you want something more exquisite, like a nicely brewed coffee, you can always buy it. So with that, thank you all very much.